They're my favorite movie too. Yeah, all right, so here's what's so funny. So some of you know, I grew up, it was just me and my mom growing up. And so when I was a kid, when we'd go see movies, we defaulted to what my mom wanted to see when I was growing up, which was typically rom-com movies. So everybody else was going to see superhero stuff. And I was like, hey, here's, I don't know, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Like we were seeing all these kind of movies. And I would laugh because my brain is just, I've been probably a little bit more to the logical things. So I'd watch these movies and they were so predictable. And what always made me mad, I don't know if you ever felt this, was like the other guy in the movie. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like The Notebook. What happened to the other guy? Like, how's he doing now? Like, nobody talks about that. Like, I always get, like, how do you compete with Ryan Gosling anyway? You know what I mean? Like, I would have all these thoughts. And so I'd sit there and dissect the movie. And she wasn't a fan of me doing that. And I saw all these rom-com movies. And what was so funny to me about these is how easy it was for these people to fall in love. You know what I mean? Like, you see these movies, and in the first 15 to 20 minutes, they're like in love. They know. I mean, it is like, you know, all of the angels singing and music in the background. And it's so funny to me. Like, I would see these movies, I go like, that can't be how it works. And then I got a little bit older, and as I started like getting older and like middle school, then all of a sudden I realized I can fall in love with somebody in about 11 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would see a girl, we'd never even talk, and I'd be like, I love you. Like, there's a little bit of that, you know? And there was a part of middle school where, you know this, some of you like went out with people, but you never went out with anybody. You know, you're going out, you never went anywhere, nor did you ever talk. And that was me in middle school. So I dated a lot of people in middle school without ever talking to them. And there was falling in love so fast and all this. Now, what's interesting is, you know, as you get older, and in high school you dated. Some of you dated for a while in high school. Some of you dated people in college for a long time. Some of you got married, all these kinds of things. And the longer that you're in a relationship, you realize this, that it is a lot different to find yourself falling in love versus staying in love. Do you know what I mean? Like, falling in love is like, if somebody walks by and you're like, oh, Jesus, you know, a little bit of that, you know? Staying in love is like, what's this like 2.5 years in or 4 years in or 5 years in? And it's like, you smell different now. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of those kinds of things where you just feel the weight of going, it's a little bit different. Now, some of you don't know this, but me and Emily's story is we dated for, almost total 7 years before we got married. And that was in our 20s, like in college, and then for a few years out of college. And so it was a long time that we dated. And I'll tell you, as we were processing through this, we broke up for a little while, for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And we dated other people. And then people? Anyway. We're apparently taking the 10:30 service for our internet. That'll be great. But we dated other people, and as we did, it just became so apparent to us that if I had to stay in love with the other people that we dated in the meantime, I don't know that I could have. Why? Because I'd both fallen in love and wanted to stay in love with somebody that I both found compatibility with and that I enjoyed, was like my best friend, and that sounds all sweet. But at the end of the day, it's also true. There was something about our relationship that really mattered. Now, the other part that I would say this, I am disproportionately lucky in this, is that I grew up in a home where we talked about dating the opposite sex from the time that I was like a little kid. Like, I remember my mom praying over my wife when I was in elementary school. We do that with our kids. So, like, it was always a part of just my upbringing. You know, my mom would tell me things. She goes, you're going to make all sorts of decisions in your life, but there's one that matters most. And she was entrepreneurial, and so as I got older, she would appeal to both my heart on it, and then she would appeal to, like, the financial part of it. Like, you married the wrong person, and then if it doesn't go well, like, that's a big financial hit. I'm like, Mom, I'm in 7th grade. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, like, we were hustle bro stuff along those lines at that point. And then what I was so grateful for is that my mom started preparing me for marriage when I was really young. So I was the middle schooler who was given like books like for men and women only, and she would make me read she would make me read it from the women's perspective early. My mom would make me open doors for everybody. Like, she taught me like what it looked like, and all those things sound great. And at the time, I was like, this is maddening. You know what? I don't even talk to them. You know what I mean? I'm an introvert. Middle school version of me had Backstreet Boy highlighted hair and was the ladies, not so much. So there's that. And I'll never forget this. Though. I felt, though, that when it came time for me to get married, this is what I'm so grateful for. I had been prepared along the way to think about this. Now, some of you, you're here and you're single and you're processing through, eventual marriage, that sort of thing. That's something you want. And you have thought about it, but my question is a lot around what does it like to be prepared with it? Some of you are married right now. and you look at kind of areas that feel like they've bubbled up. And a lot of the areas that bubble up in marriage where there's issues or problems, this sort of thing, actually kind of stem all the way back to being prepared for that thing before it comes. And so I tell married people all the time, especially when you hear what I'm going to talk about today and next week, is so much of this is going, you can't go back, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 years ago to make like a different decision in that. But what you can do now is work to being prepared for what's to come in the future and bring healing to what's happening as much as you can now. And then I'll say this, and I said this earlier kind of as a joke, but some of you are single and you're like, I'm just not even interested. That's not even on my radar. I don't have the desire. And I mean this. But you have so much influence, right? Some of the most influential people in my life were single people who taught me what it looked like to be self-aware and to be aware of what it looks like to have a relationship with the opposite sex. Right? In fact, one of the most influential people in my life has never been married. He's an incredible, incredible human, incredible leader, and taught me more about how to treat women than most anybody else. And I would say this, you have influence, sometimes more than you know. And I would say what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks is for all of us. Now, the premise of this, and where we're going to get started is this. A lot of people make promises around falling in love and staying in love. But promises are no substitute for preparation, right? So you get to the wedding day, and you know this, you're going to do your vows, you're going to say all these things. When you tell somebody that you love them for the first time, or you accidentally let it slip that you love them for the first time, all of that has some version of commitment connected to it, right? But love and staying in love and cultivating love is not just about like falling into it. It actually requires something of you that's so far beyond your words that it gets to the heart of who you are and what you have sort of cultivated in your own life. It's kind of like this. I don't do long distance running, but I have a lot of friends who do, and I'll talk to them about this, and they'll say like, hey, we're gonna go run a marathon. And for years I thought people just decided to go run 32 miles? 26, yeah. Because 32, that's stupid. You know what I mean? Like 26, yeah. They're like, I'm going to go run 26 miles. I was like, you just woke up one day and started running. And now they look at me like, you're welcome back. There's a little bit of that. Because you know this, if you're going to train for a marathon, you start training. Like it doesn't happen overnight. You go. I have a lot of friends who did better than me on the SATs. Why? Because they prepared and they studied for 12 years in school. And there's a little bit of this. You get this in other areas. But relationships, what we are fed when it comes to relationships, especially romantic stuff, is that you fall in love and that thing carries you through whatever's next. But I put in my notes, I said it this way. I was like, saying I do doesn't make you able. It just makes you accountable, right? It doesn't make you able to have a great marriage. It just makes you accountable to the person that you made the vows to and everybody that heard you and your mama. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of this and their mama. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of this where you go, it just makes you accountable to the commitment that you've already made. But the words of the commitment, and again, I do all these weddings. I love doing weddings. We did y'all. I can start pointing everybody. There's a bunch of people in here that have done their wedding. It's fun. I've done all these weddings, and I love it. And it's such a special day, and everybody makes the commitment. It's so great. But I'll just tell you, and you know this already. If you're married, you know this. If you're engaged, you know this. If you're dating, you know this, right? The commitment part of it is a little bit overrated. It's beautiful, and it's great, and it matters. But it does not make you able for a great marriage. It just doesn't. It doesn't. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of passages of Scripture, and everything today that we're going to talk about is a primer for where we're going over the next few weeks. The couple of passages we're going to look at today, most of them were written by a guy named Solomon in an area of the Bible called Proverbs, and if you've never read it, it's fun to read because it's short. And it's just a lot of, if you don't like reading the Bible, it's great, it's short. And there's all these, I'm with you, I'm like, let me just read the quick hits. This is a great one to read. It's 31, so you can do it like a month, these one chapter a day. But there's these like principles throughout, and the bulk of it is these principle type sayings. And he writes a lot about relationships. So these wise sayings that sum up these core principles about how we're to embrace each other and experience life. Now, the premise of this, I want to give you like the premises of the verses we're going to look at. So here's kind of the premise of it. And that's this. That the paths that we choose trump the promises that we make. All right? The direction and the path that you choose will always, in every area of your life, but especially marriage, those paths will trump the promises that we make. And the second one is this, that my present will be my past and will probably show up somewhere in my future, which means that the decisions you're making today will likely show up a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. which means that we have to have so much wisdom in how we approach our life now. And when we're looking for somebody who's going to be a spouse, that sort of thing, and we'll talk about this later, you're looking at the decisions that they have made and are making as an indicator for what the marriage is going to be like. And then the last one is this, that every decision, right, all of our decisions have some form of a consequence, positive or negative. All of the decisions have a form of a consequence. And here's the fun part. My mom used to tell me this too. She would say this all the time. She'd go, God has never promised to remove the immediate consequences of your sin. Now, he has promised, as followers of Jesus, to give us life eternal with him. But he doesn't promise to heal all of the easy parts of our bad choices so that all of a sudden we just don't feel the pain anymore. And you know this intuitively. Sometimes he does. We ask him to do those things. But over time, he heals those things. But he doesn't promise to remove the consequences of our choices. My mom would always teach me this, which is fun. She goes, there are decisions that you could make with the authorities. That's what she always called them, the authorities, that I can't get you out of. And I'm like, that's so comforting. It's good night, sleep good. And I'm like, Mom, I'm 6. There's a little bit of that, but she'd tell me this. And then as I got older, she would say this with marriage. She goes, there are decisions that you'll make now that you have no idea what you're doing. That if you make unwise decisions here, it will show up later. Your decisions have consequences, positive and negative, right? So we're going to look at Proverbs chapter 14, verse 8. Here's what it says. Solomon's writing about this, and I wish I could get everybody, honestly, if I could have you memorize a few verses around your behavior, these are a few of them. It says, the wisdom of the prudent, or the wise, is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. Right? Now, around this, you have this idea around your paths, which are really like your habits, your patterns, and your approach to everything in your life. Now, folly isn't a word that you likely use very often, but in the original language, it just simply means this. It's like a lack of understanding or common sense, right? Now, common's kind of funny to me because I'm like, a lot of the common sense stuff that you know in the back of your head and in your heart, we just don't apply because we want immediate gratification, right? And then the other part of the folly that's interesting is there's something about people, there's something about me, most of us in the room, that we often have the capacity to see where a path is taking us, but believe that we'll be able to change our trajectory midway through. No one says this out loud. Sometimes what we do is we say, hey, I see where this path would take me, but I want to get the maximum amount of pleasure in whatever those steps are before I fall off the cliff. And what the writers of the Old Testament, in particular wisdom literature, what Jesus would later teach, Paul would teach is this. That is getting you on a path that is hard to get out of. And you can set yourself up for much deeper pain later on. So the prudent, and what the writer would teach here, Solomon's talking about, is the prudent fast forward ahead and say, where is my path taking me? And they choose to go, hey, I'm going to be wise about where I'm heading because I don't even want to get on the wrong path. Because my commitment isn't necessarily based off the words that I say. It's more based on the path that I'm on, the path that I've chosen. So I want to make sure I'm on the right path, moving forward with the right thing, with the right sort of consequences. Now, later on, he makes one of the most life-altering statements for me personally. This is one of the things I grew up with. I still read this consistently. We're trying to teach this to our kids. And here's what it says in chapter 2, verse 3. It says this. It says, the prudent, and I love this, the prudent see danger, and they take refuge. But the simple or the unwise keep going, and they pay the penalty. And some of you have a name for that person. You know what I mean? Some of you have a friend that's that person. Most of us certainly had a friend in college that was that person. This is the hold my beer friend. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that and just see what happens. There's a little bit of this where you go like, the prudent, come on, the prudent fast forward in their life. They zoom out and they see danger before it comes. They recognize the paths that they are on and where the path leads. And then they commit themselves to the right path or the wisest path that they can find without ever trying to get on the road that leads them away. They take refuge before it happens. And the simple, and you know this, again, everybody has this friend. Some of us have done this before. Most of us have done some version of this. The simple see where it's going, and they stay on the path. And here's the thing, and this is what's so funny. I wish I could convince everybody to look at the Bible this way, but I believe that Jesus loves you. I believe that God actually wants what's best for your life. And we see these moments throughout Scripture where it talks about, God being a father to us, which is almost the assumption like, what would a good father say to a child that he cares about? Wise things. That's what you would say. And this is what's, I love this. He rarely ever, if ever, forces you on whatever the path is. He will, I think he oftentimes gives you direction and wisdom, oftentimes in your wise friends, people like that. But at the end of the day, he rarely forces you. But I'll tell you, what he wants for you is a life without the regret that some of us continue to carry based off of our own decision making. Now, back in chapter 14, verse 15, here's what it says. He goes on, he says, the simple believe anything, and I love this, but the prudent give thought to their steps. And in the context of this is what's so fascinating, and the context is written in, there's almost this assumption that there are things that are deceptive, that are communicated to you, often adopted by us because we didn't think through it or we didn't process it. But I'll just tell you this, come on. The prudent or the wise evaluate everything that's given to them and say, is this where I'm supposed to go? Your relationships are more about wisdom than your emotions. Your relationship and your marriage will be much more about your capacity to make wise decision-making both before you get married, during your marriage, and the entirety of your marriage. Then it'll be, come on, based off of Valentine's days and roses and sex and all of those things. It just won't be. What will happen for you is the capacity to make wise decisions along the way when it comes to your relationship. So I said this earlier, and we're going to talk about this practically for just a second. That's this. So the paths that we choose, right, trump the promises that we make. And then if you're single and you're looking at relationships, and what should feel like weight to us is this. The past is a better indicator than a promise that somebody makes to you. Now, you know this already. If you've ever hired anybody, come on, you know this. They can say whatever they want to say in an interview. Come on, you know this. Say whatever you want to say. I want to know the references, but I don't even want to know the references you put down. I want to know the references of the jobs that you didn't put the manager down. That's who I'm calling. You know what I mean? Like lovingly. I think that's legal. Anyway, is that legal? No, I'm totally kidding. Like, I want to know. Like, I want to know where you came from. Like, I want to know what's going on. I want to know what your past is saying. Now, some of you, as soon as I say this, and I feel this a little bit too, but what about grace? Right? This is real blunt. You maybe never heard a pastor say this. Jesus gives you grace and eternity and loves you forever. But my daughter, Eleanor, is not going to give everybody grace for the future marriage that she may have. I don't want that for her. I want her to be wise and pick somebody who's making wise decisions. Now, does that mean that everybody's qualified? No, everybody's got to pass. That's not that. Everybody sins. Everybody's got to pass. But I'll tell you what, whatever's happened over here, I want to be processed as her dad before they get into it. You know what I mean? So she's 5. Some boy told her she was beautiful the other day. I can tell you where he lives. You know what I mean? Like, I'm totally kidding. That's just a joke. But I'll just tell you, that's a joke. But I'll say, it's a joke. It's a joke. But I'll just tell you, like for me, that's totally good. But I'll just tell you this. Come on, you know this. There's a part of us. Come on, you know this. As a dad, as a parent, you know this. That there are decisions that people make that Jesus gives grace for, and that you give grace for. But that does not mean that you ignore their present circumstances and decision-making and maturity for future relationships. There are people that many of us dated in high school, you know this, that your parents were like, please not her, please not him. And then they figured out that they couldn't say that. And so then they would come over and they're like, oh, he's so great. And then when you left the room, they're like, I'm going to kill him. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of that. You know this too. Come on. But there's a part of you that you know this. People that you love, your best friends, you look at this and you go, like, it's not about being perfect in the past. It is about processing your sin, pain, all of it, to get to a place where you are mature enough to be who you need to be both now and in the future. And you know, come on, you know this. There are people that you know who did not do that or heed that wisdom. They got into a marriage and they thought that the marriage would fix the relationship. And let me just tell you, the marriage itself only amplifies what exists. Marriages don't heal. Marriages exemplify. And so I'll just say, and some of you are like, man, I'm in a marriage right now. This is like all this pain. It's not going. How do we do that? And I'm just going to tell you, ready? the magnifying glass that's on it, whatever, come on, you know this. As a married couple, you go, okay, how do we pursue maturity together and apply this now? And I'll just tell you, your current and your past inform where you're going, but your decisions moving forward are what shape your future. So I put it in my notes, I said it this way, I said this. You have to commit now to become someone who can keep his or her commitments later. And if you're not married yet, I'll just tell you this is the internal work for you of going, I'm going to work on the part of me now that's going to prepare me for where I'm heading in the future. Some of you that are married, come on, I'm just going to tell you, you want to fix your spouse, and that's great, but you need to look inward and go, what are the commitments I need to make now so that I can be the person who is mature and healthy later? You can't change them. Marriage doesn't change a person. It exemplifies and it puts a magnifying glass on what exists, but you can work on where you are. So here's what I'm gonna do, and this is how we're gonna wrap up our time, and then we're gonna send you out, and after all of this fun, hard teaching, we're gonna give you donuts, and then you get to go watch the Super Bowl. It'll be great. But let me tell you what we're gonna do. Now, the caveat to this is this. I'll say this to you guys. I don't know if I'll say this in the next service. The hardest thing for me to do as a pastor in talking about what we're about to talk about is that everybody just goes, well, you're a pastor, you're supposed to say that. Or you're like a little bit of fuddy-duddy. I don't know if we say that in the North, but that's what, that sort of thing. Or there's a piece of this too, and we don't do this at our church very often. We make a joke about it. But people don't call me Pastor Patrick here. Like that's not something that happens, at least seriously. And I'll tell you why, you ready? Because, and I know this, you know this, I've been in cultures where people elevate the guy that has the microphone on simply because he can teach well. And I'll just tell you, I want to lower the bar. Like if this is I want to be so far down here. So when I screw up, you're like, well, yeah, we figured. There's a little bit of that. Like there's not this high. Now you're like, now can I say, and I mean this, because I am so broken, fallen human, like all that kind of stuff. There's nothing elevated about me except the fact that I'm on a platform. But anyway, there's a little bit of that. I mean this. And so can I just tell you this? This is hard for me to talk about, not because it's not true, but because if you're not a follower of Jesus, you expect the guy to say this who doesn't understand where you're coming from, except I do. And if you are a follower of Jesus, you go, well, that's what I've heard since I was in middle school when I burned things, making commitments, and I prayed things, making commitments, and I nailed stuff to a cross, making commitments, all that kind of stuff, which is all great. And at the same time, if it were that easy, you would have done it. Do you know what I'm saying? So for the next couple of minutes, I want to talk to you as just a guy, a human, who also goes, this is the right way to live, right? So here's when it comes to these relationships, we'll unpack these a lot more over the next little bit, but here's this. First thing that you have to do, I think, is you have to work at dealing with your past, right? Now, for some of you, that's sin. That's sin in your past that you neglected, ignored. And here's the thing. You can stop doing it, but not having dealt with the effects of it, and it will show up in your future. There are things in our marriage that show up because of sin that I had in my life in high school, middle school, college, all that kind of stuff. And it just shows that until you deal with it, until you work through it, name it, acknowledge it, there's that. Some of you, it's not a sin thing. It's something that someone else did to you, or it was pain that you acquired through family, or it's pain that you acquired through somebody who shouldn't have treated you that way. Somewhere along the way, and it exists. Good or bad, it exists in you. And until you do the work of dealing with your past will show up in your present, and it certainly will show up in your future. If you want to have kids one day, I'll just tell you this. We talk about this at our house all the time. There are times where I can see my own brokenness in our kids because they've observed it in me at 36, right? I'm planning the counseling bill for when my kids get older. I'm like, my bad. I love it. I'm just half joking, but like Donald Miller, who's a writer, said this, and I thought it was so good. He goes, there are things that I know that I will transfer through proximity that I just want to own and name and help them process through, right? But I'll tell you, one of the healthiest things you could ever do is deal with your past. Now, the next part I'm going to say is this. There's two things here. I'm going to speak to women and I'm going to speak to men. And you may go, that feels sexist. And I'll go, you might be right. And also, I'm right. So if you want to do this, we can interchange them both. But it'll feel weird to do. This is me talking to you. This is what I see a lot. Women don't tolerate being treated like a commodity. Now, guys don't tolerate it either. But it's just different, right? And I'll just tell you, I grew up in the South, so this was like hammered into me Watch this in married couples, and you'll see this in married couples. You can tell so much about how a woman expects to be treated and how a man treats a woman when they're together based on what they say, how self-sacrificing they are with each other, all of these sorts of things. And I'll just say this to you. There's a piece of like women that go like, hey, I don't want that, I don't need that sort of thing. So can I just tell you, if that's a piece of you, let me just tell you, I think that's true. I don't think that you necessarily need a man to do that. I think it's as much for the man as it is for you, as a reminder that God called him to die for your family, right? To die to himself. Now I think that goes both ways, but I'm just saying this. Don't allow anyone to treat you like a commodity. And anytime someone does, you can just tell them, hell no. Literally, get that hell. I don't want that here. None of that. Be done. Some of you have been with somebody that's treated you like a commodity for so long, come on, just say, and you don't even reckon it, but all your friends do. And your dad's sitting there like, I'm going to take, there's a little bit of that. I'm just going to tell you, listen, that only gets more exemplified throughout marriage and relationships. All right. Second one is this. The guy, same thing. The other one is this. I think men, when it comes to their desires, and I speak this quite a bit, you have to bring your desires under control before they control you in marriage. There is no small desire, addiction, and a lot of people just immediately apply this to sex. I don't think it's just sex. There's 1,000 things like this. Now, this is true for both, but I think when men are in favor, I'm just telling you, you have to bring whatever those desires are under control ahead of time before it ever makes it into your marriage. Now, are you ever going to be perfect? You're never going to be perfect at it. But a man who acknowledges those things and says, I want to bring that up under control. I tell women this all the time, especially when they're dating. And I'll just say what you look for, okay? I think when you're looking at this, you look at the areas of a person's life who feel like there's a mess that they're trying to do this with. And they can be small, it can be big, but whatever that is, eventually whatever's being hidden here, it will come off. You're going to see it at some point. And if there's a part of you, there's a hand of you that goes, I just didn't feel, it will only get bigger. And it's not about perfection. But you will know when someone is saying, I'm addressing my own mess. Now, here's the fuddy-duddy part. You ready? Here's the fun one. You ready? I would say this. I think you have to postpone the physical. Now, the immediate question that everybody who's not a seventh grader asks is, well, how far is too far? You know what I mean? I was in student ministry a long time, and that was my favorite question from sophomores. And how far can we go? And I was like, if you're asking that question, you're not on the right path. You know what I mean? And everybody's talking about vertical, horizontal. I'm like, you know how it works. You know what I mean? It's not like, I'm not sure. Come on. So here's what I'm going to tell you. And as an adult, are you ready? This is what drives me nuts. We're going to talk about this more, but I'll just say this. Everything in our culture pushes us to say, I want to express myself sexually the way that I want to do it. Now, I'm just going to tell you, great. Everything in culture can tell you that. And simultaneously, everything in Scripture goes, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. How far is too far? Jesus doesn't ever answer that question. Don't do that, don't do that. Why not? And I'm a practical person. And I'll do all the study stuff. I won't do this today. Because everything around this, even culturally now, talks about data. That when you allow yourself to continually do that, it does something to your future relationship, your current relationship. Some of you don't even know. People who live together prior to marriage, this is so fascinating. The statistics of them divorcing later on are almost 5 times as high as people who don't. I'm a data guy, so I'm just looking at you going, look, can you imagine being on your first date and going, look, hey, I love you. I'm ready to risk it for the biscuit. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I didn't think through the connotations of that. I really didn't. We were definitely taking the 1030. Anyways, but I'm just saying, can you imagine, I'm going to roll the dice on this. I know that it's 5 times higher, but girl, you know what I mean? There's a little bit and I was going to tell you, come on, you know this. Don't. You're like, because Jesus told me to? Sure. And also, don't. And I get this. You're like, man, you're 36 and you're a pastor. I'm just going to tell you, between us, we're not taking this one anyway. Emily and I dated for 7 years. We're not perfect, and we didn't have sex before marriage. So everybody that comes to me is like, hey, it's impossible. We've been together for 2 months. I'm like, shut up. You know what I mean? A little bit. Can I tell you why? Because I know how difficult it is. But I know that when you set yourself on a path, and we weren't perfect, but I'm just saying, when you set yourself on a path where following Jesus matters more to you than other things, so don't miss this. It moves you in a direction where you don't experience the same regret. Buddy-duddy. All right, here we go. The last one is this, right? Non-Christians, if you're here not a follower of Jesus, I say this, I love telling people this. Don't date a Christian unless you plan to become one. And here's why. Because if they're a Christian and they don't have the same values as you, it's going to suck for you. You know what I mean? You're going to be frustrated because you don't hold the same values. Now, if you're curious about Christianity, great. But I would tell them, don't marry either, because at some point along the way, you're going to go, man, this is hard. We don't see the world the same way. We're doing this. And they keep talking about all these other things. So I'm just going to tell you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, figure out whether you want to be a Christian before you marry a Christian. Because if not, it will be much harder than you. And most of the values that you have adopted around relationships, many of those values, they won't translate. And you will either be creating a gap for them or a gap for you. And neither one of you will be fully and finally satisfied in the relationship. Just don't do it. And the last one is this. And this is going to sound so pastory, and I know this, right? Make your engagement in a local church part of your life for them. Now, of course, the pastor says that, but I'll tell you why. Even if it's not here, go find another church where you can. I actually have told couples that I've had couples that I've asked to leave our church, not because I didn't want to be a part of it, because one of them didn't like it. Now, you got to go find somewhere where you both can fully be a part of it and engage and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm probably the only pastor in Columbus who says go somewhere else. But it's not because I don't want you here. It's because I want you to go together and find your place. Now, the reason that this matters, again, I'm a data guy, and we'll show you this data as we move through the series, is when you both are invested in a local church, and specifically a local community, proximity to other people moving in the same direction as you will change your life. And you go like, I mean, you just want me to serve. I do want you to serve. But I want you to serve more because of the people that you're on a team with than I want your output in whatever you give here, right? This is the beauty of that. When two people are considering marriage and gay, all that kind of stuff, it's like, get involved somewhere, lock arms somewhere to build something, because that proximity to other people will change your life. This is why, I'm again, fuddy-duddy. Online church, I love it. We post stuff online all the time. Like, we have videos of it. I'm just saying, but if you do that and you process it all outside of other people, then it is impossible, it is impossible for you to find yourself in a place where you're in proximity to others. And so I'm going to tell you, be in proximity to others who are moving in the same direction. Now, last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll dismiss, is this, right? I think that God has a best plan for your future from this moment moving forward. And I would say this, to experience God's best, I need to submit to God's way. And can I just tell you this, and this is what's hard for all of us, including me, is I would say this, predetermining submission to God, whether I agree with him or not, is actually the thing that expands your faith. And can I just tell you this? Your brain is so good at this. You will find a reason to not do what Scripture calls us to in whatever relationship that you're in. My brain is so good at this. My brain is so good at making me foolish. And you've experienced this. You've experienced it with other people. You experience this with yourself. You know this. But predetermining whether I agree, whether I like it, whether it feels good, to submit to Jesus and what he's calling me to, I'm just telling you, go into it yelling, I disagree and I don't like this. I'm going to do it. Be begrudging about it. Great, just do it. And there's something about your steps of faith, I mean this, and you don't know it until you do it, that will change and shift your heart in submission. And here's how you know this, ready? And then I'm going to wrap up. I had the opportunity, one of the things, I talk about this all the time. I meet with people who are in their 80s all the time, like, tell me about your life, what would you change, what would you do, all this kind of stuff. And when I talk about relationships and marriage, and you know this, and this is kind of the trajectory that we want on. When we talk about paths with me and Emily, I'll just tell you this. You can talk to people in their 80s, and you can tell when they have a great marriage because of the affection they have about talking about the person who maybe they've lost, the spouse that they've lost along the way. You feel it. And I'll just tell you this is so fascinating. And when you get to the heart of that, none of them do all the same things. Like I talked to a lady in her 80s one time. I was like, what did you love about your husband? She had all these lists of things. She goes, he would bring me water every night before we went to bed. Now, you're like, oh, that's so sweet. That's Nicholas Sparks. That's the Notebook. And they're going to lay down together at the end, whatever that is. I don't know. It's actually not. That is a path. Somewhere along the way, that husband, I don't miss this, said that every day I recognize that she wants and needs this. And so I am on a path towards laying down my life for her. You find a husband that brings water to their wife every night. You find a man who's asking that question in most everything. All right? Now, I'm just going to tell you, that is a path choice. That is a wisdom choice. That isn't a like, and then we felt it at 76 and we decided. That's not that. That is a commitment to somebody choice that goes beyond your words. And so I'm just going to tell you this. If you're here and you're in your 20s, you're here in your 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever it is, you're not that age yet. Do everything that you can to evaluate your relationships based off of the paths that you're choosing in obedience to Jesus. We talked about this when it comes to serving. We talk about this when it comes to sex. I always laugh about the sex part. I just go like, look, at the end of the day, that is one of the hardest things to lay down. And at the end of the day, if you can do that, come on, I am feeling self-sacrifice in this area to pursue a direction and a path towards loving you with my life. If for nothing else, for the data, then I'm just telling you, that's someone who is choosing a future. For those of you who are currently married and you look at it and you're like, we just don't have those things. We just don't feel that. It doesn't feel like the romance and that kind of stuff anywhere. I was like, back all the way up to the path that you're on. And don't ask it based off of all the things that you want. Ask it based off of how I can die to myself for this other person and set myself on a path that way. Like, what if they don't reciprocate? If the only question you're asking is about reciprocation, you will never, ever, ever experience the reciprocation that you desire. I'm just telling you. You have to choose it for you first. Like, well, what if they never? It's hard. But I've seen this so many times, and I mean this so much. Well, I have watched couples and families and marriages where one of the people say, I'm going to follow Jesus no matter what, and something changes. Now, are there outliers? Sure. Abuse, that's a different thing. All right. We could talk about all those categories, that's a different thing. But that's not the story for a lot of you. It's that the romance died. And like, what do we do? I don't like where we're at now. Well, I die to myself and put myself on a path for the other person. For those of you in the room and you're not married yet, let me say one more thing. I'll say, the older that you get, the harder it gets to apply some of this. But I'll tell you this. It is possible. Your expression of whatever love is and whatever capacity it is controllable. And you will be so glad that you did. And if you choose to say, I'm going to not lower the bar, but keep the bar where Jesus set the bar, and I'm going to pursue that, I'm just going to tell you, it is, and it's always hard to say that. We were 27 when we got married, and like 22, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get married. I mean, now my mom's like, you were 22, calm down. You know, there's a little bit of that. I was like worried, you know. But I'll just tell you this, because however old you get, or whatever, if there's this gap, it is so much better, and it's hard to hear this, to be single now than to be in the wrong relationship 5 years from now. And some of you just need somebody to tell you, like, it's okay. And you're waiting for a promise that God's going to give you whoever or whatever. And maybe, nobody can really say that, but I can just tell you this. If you do the work inward and you put yourself on the right path, and it sounds so middle school pastor cheesy, and I know that, but it's also so true. When you put yourself on the right path and you start running towards Jesus and giving your life to what he has called you to do, someone comes along. This is what healthy Christian marriages look like. Someone comes along the way and starts running beside you and going, well, look how fast you run. And you look pretty good. You know, there's a little bit of that. You know, and they run with you, and you run together. And you're not sacrificing your individuality for it. You're running as God has called you to run, and they run with you. And don't settle for people who aren't. All right, let's go eat some donuts. Let me pray for us, and then we'll wrap up. Jesus, thank you so much for this, and thank you that you care about us in this way so much. You really do. And God, most of us have some version of healing around this. It's hard and painful, and we have a lot of uncertainty. Most of us have that too, and many of us in marriage, and we'll talk about this in this series. I mean, we have pain and struggle and brokenness, all of that. That's a part of living and brokenness, all that. But I asked that today, for those of us who are followers of you, that you would help us to commit to chasing you in this. That you would help us to die to things that we need to die to. You would help us to elevate our own standards of ourselves, become who it is that you called us to be. And Father, as we do that, I pray that you would bless it. And God, I ask that you would do what only you can do in our hearts and our lives, and that you would shape us into the men and women that you're calling us to be. And God, I pray that the marriages that are coming in the future, God, that you would help them to be extraordinarily healthy. God, I pray for the marriages now that might be struggling. God, I pray that they would apply this and all the other things we're going to talk about, and that you would bring healing through those steps. And I pray for the person in the room, and I know we're going to talk about this throughout, who's single and curious and looking and trying to figure that stuff out. God, I pray that above all else, and as probably cheesy as it sounds, but they would be so preoccupied with you and satisfied in you and chasing you, as they run, the right person comes and runs with them, and together you multiply their influence and their family and their relationships. In Jesus' name we pray.